Please listen carefully.
Welcome to another episode of the Extra Buttery Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Chen, and I'll be joined by my co-host, Robert Snow. As usual, we have a lot to get through this episode, including the premiere of Game of Thrones Season 7. We'll touch on other HBO shows, including a new Coen Brothers project. We'll touch on the casting troubles of the new live-action Aladdin film, and then to finish it off, we'll discuss Spider-Man Homecoming, and then preview the upcoming big July releases. So without any further ado, Sir Robert Snow, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
Good.
So, that was your first time doing the your first time doing the intro, but yeah, that's good work.
Oh, thanks. I sense a little sarcasm there.
Well, it probably sounds terrible because like I did the intro for like 13 straight episodes, so I'm probably like biased now. But as you said, like let's kick it off with Game of Thrones because
this Sunday.
Yeah, this Sunday. I mean, it's something that it caught me by surprise, I guess, that it was coming back. And maybe that's because there's been a lot of stuff going on with TV as usual. Like I've been knee deep in Twin Peaks and a couple of other series. So for me, Game of Thrones was always kind of on the horizon, but now it's like coming up this weekend. Time to dive back into the obsession. But let's just have a listen to a clip from the trailer for season 7 just to kind of set the scene.
Enemies to the east. Enemies to the west. Enemies to the south. Enemies to the north. Whatever stands in our way, we will defeat it.
It's like the second last season for them now, so there's going to be some big stuff coming up if all of the reports are to be believed.
Remember how last season we were kind of all like criticizing the Game of Thrones show about how like Arya could somehow like speed travel through everywhere? I think we're going to get a lot more of that this season because I think a lot of storylines need to be wrapped up.
Yep.
And I think we're going to have a lot of, or not a lot, but a couple episodes where it's going to be focused on action sequences. As we all know, like they divided up the last book or last season into 2 parts because of the sheer amount of money that's going to be used to create or to film the new seasons.
Yeah.
One thing I am looking forward to as a huge Game of Thrones fan, along with everyone else, is the use of flashbacks. We saw that last season with the revealing of Jon Snow as a Targaryen. And I wonder if we're going to do more of that, where we're going to have complete episodes dedicated to flashbacks, because there's a lot of plot elements that were never fleshed out before the beginning of season 1 that are really crucial to the story.
Wasn't the episode where they kind of dove into Jon Snow's backstory one of the first real examples of a flashback on the show? So they
right.
It kind of stood out in that way, and now they still have a lot of stuff left over that will go a long way to kind of setting up the final conflict, I guess. And that they're gonna just need to dive right into that. And if that means having episodes that are primarily flashbacks, then I guess that's what's gonna happen.
The one story I'm looking forward to is the part where Rhaegar Targaryen crowns Lyanna Stark as the Queen of Beauty at the tournament that sets off like Robert's Rebellion and everything. But have you ever heard of the story about the Night of the Laughing Tree?
No, I mean, my knowledge of the books is basically nothing. Like I've just been purely a show watcher this whole time.
Oh, okay, fair enough. But like that part to me is like the most interesting part. I guess, do you want to go into it? Let's go into it for a little bit.
Yeah, like, so what is it about this sort of point in the timeline that's makes it so crucial?
So, as we learned in Game of Thrones, Robert's Rebellion sets off a series of events in which the Targaryens are overthrown from the Iron Throne, right? The Targaryens' oldest son, the prince, Rhaegar, and Lyanna Stark had a son, who's Jon Snow. That so far has been established, but what hasn't been established is how Rhaegar and Lyanna Stark fell in love or had the baby. Throughout the entire Game of Thrones, the series of events have been set off by Rhaegar, who's never ever appeared on screen, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So the main character, the main guy who sets off these series of events has never been explored. All you hear is secondhand events about, how Viserys tells Daenerys that Rhaegar was a ruthless killer, but then Barristan Selmy tells Daenerys that Rhaegar is actually like a guy who really sings and loves life and all that stuff. The story about the Night of the Laughing Tree does tie into the Harrenhal episode. So the story goes that Howland Reed, or someone that is assumed to be Howland Reed, was being bullied by 3 squires before the tournament. When he was being bullied, Lyanna Stark steps in and she kind of rescues him. And then I think that later that night at a party, they're talking about how Howland Reed should step up and reclaim his honor and defeat the Knights of the 3 Squires in combat. Because Howland Reed at the time was not an experienced fighter, he's never known to be a good jouster, he doesn't follow through with it. But the following day during the tournament, against those 3 knights, a knight with a shield of a weirwood tree with a laughing face on it shows up. And that knight is never identified. And this knight defeats the 3 knights, and in return, he orders the 3 knights to basically verbally assault their 3 squires for bullying Howland Reed. It's this Knight of the Laughing Tree becomes like this sort of like mysterious character who upholds honor and duty. And at the time, Aerys Targaryen is kind of like, he's already kind of gone crazy. And so he asks Rhaegar to hunt down this knight and find out who he is, who the knight is, and to basically kill him, because Aerys in his weird craziness thinks that this knight could be a threat to his throne. And so Rhaegar goes off riding, and then he comes back though, and he tells his dad Aerys that he couldn't find anything except for the shield. And it's assumed, or the fan theory goes, that the Knight of the Laughing Tree is Lyanna Stark.
Right.
And she was the one that stepped in and avenged Howland Reed.
Oh, okay.
In the tournament. And when Rhaegar finds out, he's kind of like infatuated with her bravery, her sense of duty and honor. And in finding out, he crowns her as the Queen of Beauty, or whatever it's called, at the tournament, which sets off the events of Game of Thrones, Robert's Rebellion. And so the mystery is whether Rhaegar actually kidnapped Lyanna Stark, or they fell in love once he found out that she was the Knight of the Laughing Tree.
Oh, okay, yeah. So it's this like foundational episode in the whole lore.
Right.
Yeah, so you can see why they would probably want to turn that into a flashback in the if not a season 7 episode, then maybe a season 8 one.
And that's like the biggest thing I'm looking forward to. Other than also like, it's just interesting to see where the show goes, because it's not, George R.R. Martin hasn't published his new book. He's gonna die before he finishes writing, I swear.
Well, some people say that, that could very well happen, and apparently he's got one writer or another lined up that is the chosen person who will complete it.
When the show came out, I started reading up on like A Song of Ice and Fire and like the entire universe, which is like fascinating, by the way. It's amazing that George R.R. Martin has like created this like basically fantasy medieval type universe. I've always liked it because it kind of reminds me of King Arthur.
Right.
Really excited to see. I hope it's not a complete letdown. I don't think it will. I think people will nitpick. Like, the bar has been set so high and there's so much hype surrounding it. I'm kind of worried about like the show not matching the hype. And I'm also worried that people are going to overrate it.
Yeah, that's really hard to tell. If they're spending as much money as they claim to be, then there definitely won't be anything wrong with it on a production values level. I mean, what they've been able to accomplish in stuff like the Battle of the Bastards in the last season is just
right.
On
it's amazing.
TV budget. We've never seen anything like that before.
And this is like the end of HBO's like magical run, where I think they've made like millions and millions and millions of dollars off this franchise.
Yeah.
They're going to have to come up with something new or go back to something that was successful, like True Detective.
Exactly. Yeah. Good segue.
I think officially season 3 is going ahead because they're already starting to make casting calls. I don't know what the story is. I don't think anyone knows really, other than Nick Pizzolatto. But we have heard that Mahershala Ali is in talks to play the lead, which I think is a fantastic choice.
Oh yeah. When I saw that his name was being bandied about in connection with this project, like, even though I can't say I hated True Detective season 2.
I kind of did.
It was very unsatisfying, especially as someone who enjoyed season 1 as much as I did.
Yeah, season 1 was fantastic.
And I think we pretty much all of us thought after season 2 that that was it. But HBO seems to think that they can. Yeah, I mean, that's been pretty much the case for any TV show or movie. You know, if it has that kind of negative reception, the people putting the money behind it just, they're not going to try it again. But I don't know. I guess maybe they've seen some of Pizzolatto's early drafts for this season, and they figure that they can win over the fans again. I don't know.
And I wonder where it's going to be set, because like the city and the setting itself is so central to True Detective. Like the setting is a character in itself. So I hope we don't go back to California or New York or whatever, that we go into some place that's relatively unexplored, kind of like how season 1 was in Louisiana.
Yeah, well, my vote, I mean, this just popped into my head, but like maybe we could go to like the Midwest or some area.
Like Fargo?
Like, well, yeah, Fargo's already got that locked up, and you can't put it in.
No, but it's fine though.
Maybe because like then I'm just like geographically I'm just hopping around the continental U.S. and I'm like, well, they can't go to Pacific Northwest because then it would be too much like Twin Peaks. So that kind of rules that out. But maybe they could do like Washington D.C. That's also House of Cards, but there's just too many great.
You're talking yourself into a corner.
I know, it's just, but that in a way kind of goes to show how many great shows have used their immediate surroundings to become a character and to inform so much of what we see.
Sure, but I mean, there are different ways to interpret it. Like we've had a lot of shows based in Miami, but not necessarily Florida. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah. So you could go like upstate Florida or something and maybe come up with a different interpretation. I think one thing that season 2 also needed that season 1 had was a little bit more of that flavor of like, not quite the supernatural, because nothing really happens in season 1 that can be called outright supernatural. But there was this flavor of kind of unexplained, potentially like magic realism kind of stuff going on, and granted it was tied a lot to pre-existing literature and movies and things that have come out of Louisiana, so it kind of felt of a kind. But season 2 didn't have anything like that. It was a lot more about just the seedy underbelly of, I guess, what was Vince Vaughn in that? He was basically a gangster running.
He was kind of like a land developer.
Developer. So there was that kind of aspect to it. And then there was also the side of like the hippie guy played by David Morse, who was running the retreat up on the cliff. And, like,
yes.
Out of anything, like those scenes seemed like probably the most likely to have that weirdly supernatural kind of flavor to them, but it didn't end up going that way. So, wherever they decide to go in season 3, I'd kind of like to see that element of it come back in, because I think that's really important to it feeling like True Detective.
Not so much, maybe not supernatural, but mythical.
Yeah.
I think season 2 really failed because, one, Vince Vaughn is just not good in anything, and I'll fight anyone on this. I just think he's terrible. He's not convincing as a villain. The plot takes way too long. There's too many loose threads that they kind of sprinkle throughout the first couple episodes, but it takes way too long to get started. And even Colin Farrell couldn't save that show, so that's how bad it was.
Yeah. There was a lot of there was a lot of reasons why that thing fell apart. They also gave Vince Vaughn, like, his strong suit may not be drama, and I'll probably agree with people on that. I think I've seen him in like one other thing where he was convincing if in a dramatic role, and the name doesn't even come to me now, so that kind of goes to...
Oh my god, did you ever see him in the remake of Psycho?
No, but I'm thinking of something else, I think, but either way...
Okay, well, just avoid that movie, because he is awful. awful.
They also, because wasn't it the case that Nick Pizzolatto kind of distanced himself partway through the production of season 2, so he had less influence over the scripts, and then Vince Vaughn was given these long passages that he had to deliver that had this very odd, almost like poetic kind of quality to them.
Oh, kind of like Rusty Cole.
Sort of, but even more spacey. I don't know. It was,
but I thought
because at least you could follow what McConaughey was saying, and you could see that like there was a logic to what he was saying. But when Vaughn was speaking, he was kind of spitting out these lines that I don't know, you could interpret them like 3 or 4 different ways. And so,
but wasn't season 2 kind of another reason why it failed was that Nick Pizzolatto really wanted to take like more creative control over the material. That's why the director of the first season never came back, right? Because they butted heads.
Oh, Cary Fukunaga.
Yeah, I thought that was the case. No, I mean, when Vince Vaughn is like, I guess, making the key decisions, I mean, I can't see how it can turn out to be good.
It was a case where it was hard for Vince Vaughn to succeed. It was hard for several of the actors to succeed. I mean, probably the one guy who comes out of that the cleanest is Colin Farrell. That just, he has he's brilliant. He's brilliant. He has, I think he out of everyone there could take a weird script with those kind of strange poetic departures and not seem fazed by it.
He plays tortured characters very well. Speaking of tortured characters, though, you're all about this new Coen brothers project, and they usually have really quirky and weird characters.
Yes, yeah. And now...
What's it called, Rob?
Well, it's called The Ballad of Buster Scruggs.
Which is a hilarious name.
If there was ever a good name for, like, a Western, that would be it. And it's going to be a TV show, which is a bit of a different tack for Coen brothers. I think, I can't remember if they've done any writing for TV in the past, but this is probably the first time where it's like a show that has their name stamped all over it.
I feel like their stuff is more catered towards TV, though, because I think they're really good at world building as well. Yeah,
I mean, you can see why they would be a good fit for this medium, right?
Right.
So this show doesn't actually have a home yet. It would probably, It sounds like the kind of thing that HBO would pick up, but it could very easily go to Netflix. It could go to Amazon Prime. It could go to a lot of different places. And it's going to be an anthology series, a little bit like True Detective or a little bit like American Horror Story, but even more fractured than that because every episode is going to be a self-contained story.
Right.
And they've already signed on a couple of recognizable names to be in a couple of these stories. They've got James Franco, Zoe Kazan, Tim Blake Nelson, who the Coen brothers worked with on a couple of projects.
Including Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
So he's sort of a returning player for them. And yeah, it's not scheduled to come out until 2018, but just the fact that they're working officially, I guess, in this different medium is more than enough to get me to sign up and watch wherever it ends up. So, and, it's great to see the Western genre. You can't really say that it ever fully died. It definitely had a period where it lost a lot of influence, but it's kind of building its way back up now, especially with like Westworld and a couple of really successful indie movies that have come out in the past 10 years or so.
Right. But is it going to be like a straight Western? Because Westworld is like a Western, but at the same time, there's like modern sci-fi robot elements to it, right?
Oh yeah, this is going to be a straight up Western, so it won't even have that robot modern day angle that Westworld has. And maybe that's why they're kind of pitching it as in that anthology format, because maybe they think that it'll be hard to get a mainstream audience to sign up for a full-on episode to episode or serialized story.
Right. What was their last project? I can't remember.
The last project that they directed was Hail Caesar.
Right. That was a while ago.
Which I loved. I was like, it was a while ago, but they've got a good reputation in Hollywood for being script doctors, so they will often work behind the scenes and clean up scripts that are in a bit of trouble, or they'll just do scripts and, put their names on them officially for directors that they like to work with. I think they one of their recent works was a script for the upcoming George Clooney movie Suburbicon. So he's going to direct, and they're the official screenwriters. So yeah, they haven't been quiet, but this is the first one where they're kind of coming out, and it's their new director project.
Well, it sounds really good actually, because I love westerns. Because there's something like, a lot of times it feels cliched because it's a genre that's been around for so long, but at the same time, like, it is so, a part of it is, based in real life. It's an era that really existed, but at the same time, there's also like really basic human emotions involved in westerns.
Yeah, and when they're teased out properly, it can be really effective. Like, or when it's taken as sort of the base and then it's built upon. Good example of that was the Michael Fassbender thing that very few people saw, called Slow West.
Yes,
where they took the western genre and then they kind of transposed it to a landscape in New Zealand that doesn't really look a lot like the real Old West.
No.
But it looks enough like it that it almost becomes a dreamy, otherworldly version of it.
Did you like Slow West?
I really did. Like, I thought it was unique, and the performances were really strong. The script was a little bit wonky. I mean, I can't really say it was like 100% memorable, but I kind of respected it as a creative endeavor. Now we've got probably the biggest movie of this past weekend, and that's Spider-Man Homecoming.
Yes.
And here's a piece of one of the Spider-Man trailers.
Hey, Peter, you coming tonight?
I can't tonight. I got the Stark internship.
What's up, guys?
Mr. Stark, here's my report for tonight. I stopped the Grand Theft bicycle.
Hey, could you do me a favor? Hold on to that. Is this anybody's bike?
Oh, I helped this old lady and she bought me a churro. So, that was nice. I just feel like I could be doing more.
Now, granted, this is where it gets really confusing, because it's not a Disney film in the sense that, like, we didn't have any Disney logos off the front of the actual movie. It was a Sony film, but it was produced by, like, on a filmmaking level, a Disney company, Marvel Studios. So already the kind of provenance of this movie is getting mixed up, and to say nothing of some of the more confusing reports I've seen about, like, whether or not this movie is a part of the same cinematic universe as the other movies that Sony wants to make about some of the villains, like the Sinister Six or the Tom Hardy Venom movie. Like, it's so confusing, but
right.
It's probably easier if we just look at Homecoming for now, like, for what it is. Because otherwise my head's just going to keep spinning.
Yeah. So before we go into it, just listeners, if you haven't seen it, there will be spoilers. I feel like even though if Rob and I try our hardest not to reveal anything, something will be said that may spoil the movie. So skip ahead if you don't want to listen to this part. But Rob, like, I know you saw it like a couple days before me, but what was your rating? Like,
I gave it on Letterboxd because that's like my go-to now for tracking anything I do with movies.
Right. IMDb's too much of a mess.
Yeah. Their community is like being shut down and stuff. So anyways, Letterboxd is my poison. And on there I gave it 4 out of 5, but using the classic 4-star system that Roger Ebert and a lot of other pro critics go for that, I will do 3 out of 4.
So this is one of the rare times where I'm gonna rate a movie higher than Rob.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, so this is like uncharted territory for Rob and I.
Yeah.
Sometimes. Out of 5, I gave it 4.5. Out of 4, I honestly is either 3.5 or 4. I haven't really decided.
Oh, wow.
But not that it's a perfect movie.
No.
But at the same time, like, this is so refreshing and so different from the other Marvel movies that I just felt like every scene and every sequence in the movie was pretty enjoyable. Like, there wasn't any huge gripes I had to pick. Because what had plagued the previous Marvel films, like having a bad villain, a poor villain, a boring villain, a really bad palette, kind of humorless action. I think this was all kind of remedied in Homecoming. And I loved how in Homecoming, they didn't stick too much to the comic book lore. They kind of played around with a couple ideas, especially with character names. And I really enjoyed it because as a person who's quite familiar with the source material, it was quite refreshing to see a new take.
Yeah, you didn't know exactly where they were taking it, and it's not like you were kind of sitting there and be like, oh, well, that references that comic arc in such and such a year and such a month, and so therefore I know that this villain is going to do this. That I can see why that would be a bit of a concern.
And I mean, there's tons of Easter eggs still, but I just don't think it was like kind of like pounded into your head. I thought all the funny moments were legitimately funny. But what didn't you like? I'm more curious to hear what you didn't like about the film.
I'm actually hard pressed to name anything specifically. I think if anything, it kind of gets back to what we were talking about before either of us saw it. I think we were texting or something, and you kind of pointed out the Marvel films as being kind of cookie cutter. And for me, that's
right.
That's always going to be something that's in the back of my mind. It's like I'm not seeing something that was made first and foremost as a self-contained film. It always has to be compared against the ever-growing library of movies, both before and after it.
Which I think they did so in Homecoming, but it's meshed in quite well.
Yeah, I mean, there were some worries beforehand that Iron Man was going to play a far too big a role, and that it was basically going to be the Robert Downey Jr. show, and we wouldn't really get to know the Tom Holland character all that much. Which didn't happen. One thing that I really liked about it that I didn't expect was how willing the filmmakers were to show Spider-Man screwing up and like pratfalling and smacking into buildings or messing up his webs or all of these things. Because I feel like both in the Sam Raimi films with Tobey Maguire and the Mark Webb films with Andrew Garfield, when they first get their powers, there's always a montage of some kind where they're kind of getting used to it, and maybe they'll mess up once or twice, but once they're in full command of their powers, they're just effortlessly swinging between buildings, and if they mess up at all, it's because they've been like hit in the head by the villain or something. But in this, like, it's clear that Spider-Man has had his powers for some time by the point that Homecoming starts, but he's still like, he'll just be trying to get someplace and he'll smack into a garbage can, or he'll drop something, and it's played for laughs, and it usually delivers pretty well.
Right.
And but it humanizes him too. Like, it just goes even further to proving, rather than telling us with like a line of dialogue, that he's just a kid and that he has these great powers, but he's only learning to use them. And it backs up what Tony Stark is always telling him throughout the thing. Like, it kind of justifies the way Tony Stark treats him.
Right.
So that kind of worked for me. I was like, all right, yeah, the movie is practicing what it preaches.
Yeah, there's a part where Peter Parker is in the suburbs and he has no buildings or trees to swing from, so he's running across the golf course. That part was really funny. But going back to the cookie cutter thing, and I think I texted you about this, is that I kind of basically had predicted like the basic premise and arc of the film, and even though I was right, there were still like tons of stuff in there that really genuinely surprised me, especially the middle twist, or not the middle twist, but the twist near the end that precedes the final showdown between Spider-Man and the Vulture.
Right, so this is where we're into major spoiler territory, so if you've been listening up to this point but you still haven't watched, I don't know why, but this is your last chance. Yes. But essentially what we're told is that Michael Keaton's character, whose actual human name I can't remember, but I'll just call him the Vulture, he is the father of the girl that Peter is crushing on. And Peter doesn't find out about this until he actually goes to pick up Liz, the girl, from her home, where he's actually been previously in the movie to a house party. And Michael Keaton comes to the door and he's like, hey, how's it going?
Yeah, this is like one of the best kept secrets and one of the best reveals I can remember. But also at the same time, I can't remember the last time I saw a movie where the love interest and the villain are tied. And not because the villain somehow captures the girl and like she becomes a damsel in distress.
Yeah.
But where their relationship becomes central to the conflict.
Right. And like it sets up this great, like the reveal sets up this series of scenes, first in the kitchen at the house and then in the car on the way to the homecoming dance, where the Vulture slowly realizes who he's talking to, but they play it really well. It's kept very subtle. It's not like they suddenly start going to fisticuffs or anything in the car and like Liz gets kicked out of or something.
Right.
It's kept very against their chest, and then they wait until later for it to boil over into an actual fight. And I think that was an example of some great restraint. You know, it allowed the tension to continue to build, whereas, you know, probably a particular movie doesn't really spring to mind, but I'm almost positive, you know, that kind of reveal would almost always lead right to an action scene in a lesser movie.
Right. And I think the difference between this and the other Marvel films is that the Vulture, Adrian Toomes, is not hell-bent on destroying the world or the city.
Yes, yeah. I was hoping we were going to go that direction, actually, because he's like, he is just a guy who is running a business where he's just trying to make a living by cleaning up some of the damage left behind by the big fight in the first Avengers film. Mm-hmm. And he's told that, nope, he can't do that. His company's being kicked out, and Tony Stark's Department of Damage Control is going to come in and take it all away. And then he's left to kind of be a bit of a Robin Hood type character, where he's using some of the technology that he already salvaged to allow further heists. And then he becomes a bit of an arms dealer with these like otherworldly weapons. But his goals never really exceed that. Like, he's never more than just a criminal. Yeah. But, you know, it kind of works. You know, again, it's a good choice of a villain for a Spider-Man story where, you know, Spider-Man's, you know, he's not that great with his powers. So, you know, it makes sense that he would be put up against a villain whose ambitions weren't super lofty.
Right. I think there's a sympathy that you feel towards the Vulture that you kind of feel with Loki. And I think that's why the two of them are the most interesting Marvel villains. Even the minor villains, the Vulture's henchmen, I feel like there's certain backstories there that they obviously didn't have time to go into, but they're there. So the first Shocker, who Vulture basically accidentally kills, I think had a very interesting sort of spin on things. When he tries to leave the team, he's like, well, you know what? I know all this information, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave because there's nothing you can do to stop me.
And then, like, you know, that's kind of the catalyst for Adrian Toomes to decide, you know, what kind of villain he's going to be.
Right, exactly. I think overall, like, there wasn't anyone in the cast that was not good.
Yeah, there was no actors who were like annoying or anything. You know, the choice of guy for the for Peter Parker's best friend, like, sometimes sidekick characters can get a little bit grating depending on the kind of material they're given, but this guy was, you know, he felt authentic. He felt like a high schooler, just like Peter did. It's not like he worshipped Peter, you know. He occasionally got a little bit too close to revealing Peter's secret. And
the two scene stealers, though, for me were, one, Zendaya as Michelle. I thought she was brilliant. I really like these like quirky characters, and she was kind of like it's kind of like I'm playing the Molly Ringwald of the Breakfast Club in this movie, and she totally pulls it off, and she's hilarious in every respect. The other guy I thought was hilarious was Captain America, and this is part of the whole like world building thing about how this era of superheroes is sort of ingrained in these people's lives, and it's just like a part of their existence, part of the world that people just accept. Yeah. And so every time Captain America came on and delivered a PSA, I thought it was very fitting and very, very hilarious, especially the end credit scene.
Yes.
That Marvel does all the time. I feel
the virtue of patience.
Exactly. The virtue of patience. If you go see it and you don't like seeing till the end for the after credit scene, I think you should stay for this one because the punchline is funny.
Yes, yeah, and it got everybody in the audience I was into. Like, everyone was like, "Oh, okay, we've been played." You know, they've worked us up to expect this kind of thing, but then they're gonna pull it away. One thing that I didn't like, to kind of go back to one of your earlier questions, that was how they cast Hannibal Buress. Or Burris, I never know how to pronounce his name.
They don't use him.
Yeah, they kind of put this guy in who's definitely a name, and they put him as Peter Parker's gym teacher, and they give him like 2 scenes and barely any lines. And you know, I makes me wonder, like, maybe Hannibal was trying some stuff on the set that was a little bit too racy or too much like his stand-up for Disney to keep in, or maybe it was just extraneous, like it was just adding to the runtime and it was an easy cut. I don't know, but I wanted to see like at least one really funny thing from Hannibal.
I could say the same about Donald Glover. He played a much smaller role than I thought.
Oh, good point. Yeah. I almost, when he showed up, I'm like, wait, is that Donald Glover? And then I kind of expected the movie to do something,
circle back
to him, or maybe, I don't know, set him up as like a more significant character for future Marvel movies, like a proto villain or something.
Right.
But
well, he does.
If they're doing that, they're playing a long con because they don't really say anything specific.
Right. So his name is revealed to be like, I think Aaron Davis is the name, who is like a character in the Marvel universe, who's known,
but like a low level kind of guy.
Like the Prowler. The other one is like a huge Easter egg, was the guy with the scorpion neck tattoo, Mac Gargan. He becomes a scorpion later.
Oh, okay.
Or in the comics anyway. So he becomes another villain, potentially one of the Sinister Six. I just wanted to ask you, though, how did you interpret the scene where he confronts the Vulture, but the Vulture opts to keep Peter Parker's identity secret?
Oh, the mid-credit scene?
Yeah. I thought that was interesting, and it kind of confused me for a little bit because I didn't understand Michael Keaton's endgame. It makes me believe that he's going to come back for the sequel.
Yeah, well, maybe not the sequel, but maybe like a third film or something like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's definitely designed to set up something in the future, but to me, it also, like, the way he played it, and this is going to sound a little bit weird, but it's almost like he's briefly in the frame of mind of being a dad.
Yes.
And he's thinking about, he's not thinking about Peter in terms of being the kid who put him in prison, but he's thinking about him as like the classmate of his daughter.
Right.
And like, I was almost wondering, like, maybe he's just tired of being a bad guy and he doesn't want to like murder a 16-year-old. Like maybe maybe he kind of got that out of his system when they caught him or something. I mean, and if that's the case, I mean, that would be a surprisingly layered approach to take with a superhero bad guy.
I interpret it like two ways. The first is that he wanted to save Peter Parker's identity for himself because when he gets out, he wants revenge. He doesn't want anyone to spoil it for him.
Yeah.
The other thing is, like, they make a big deal about how he gives like this kind of monologue about how he respects Peter Parker and how he keeps getting up even though he keeps falling down. Which goes back to your point about how he like crashes into buildings and hits things along the way, and he's still learning his powers. I interpret it as the Vulture respecting Spider-Man, kind of like how the Joker or the Riddler never revealed to the public who Batman is. I think there's a level of respect for each other that they have that other people won't understand. Or there's a dynamic there that he doesn't want to ruin because maybe he sees himself in Peter Parker.
Yeah. I like that interpretation too. It's almost like he wants a more dignified closure to their story than Spider-Man just getting knifed by some guy in the street.
I thought the special effects were quite good, although at times, like, the thing with Spider-Man movies is that when he's swinging and jumping around, you really know it's just CGI. Like, it feels almost unnatural because he's so elastic and nimble.
Yeah, like
there's no weight to his movement. It's kind of weird in that sense.
And that was something that the Sam Raimi films did get a little bit more right. Probably because
the CGI has aged so much in that movie.
It has,
though.
yeah. But in the scenes where it is actually Tobey Maguire or a stunt double in the suit, I think that they did a little bit more practical stuff there, probably with like a wire team or something. So I feel like those are the bits that age the best out of the Raimi films.
Right. The other thing too is the action was very coherent.
Yeah. I think the only sequence where I kind of lost the thread of what was happening was the final. On the beach when they're like twisting around and the Vulture's wingsuit is starting to fall apart. I was like, it felt a little bit Transformers-y for a little while. I'm like, there's too many sparks and bits of multicolored fire. Like I couldn't really make out where.
Felt too Marvel-y.
Yeah.
I think if there was one criticism of mine, it would be the final act. But I feel like, again, they executed it much better than any of the Avengers films or any of the previous films. And it was still very self-contained, and the action sequences were, sensible and legible.
Yeah.
It made sense. But yeah, I mean, in total, I thought everything was really good. There wasn't any one part that really rubbed me the wrong way. I think there are certain characters that I felt were underused. For example, Aunt May, for one, I thought was underused.
She does have a nice moment right before the credits, though.
She does. And finally, she figures it out. Because I don't think in any of the previous movies, Aunt May ever figures out that Peter Parker's Spider-Man.
Apparently, it's strongly implied in Spider-Man 2, Sam Raimi's version, that Aunt May knows. Because she gives this kind of speech where it's she never says, like, I know who you are, but she, what she says to him is very suggestive.
Right. So in terms of, like, Spider-Man and the Spider-Man movies, where do you rank Tom Holland and where do you rank Homecoming?
I would definitely put it up there with 1 and 2, like Raimi's films.
The first one has aged horribly, though.
It has, yeah, and the Green Goblin effects are a little bit, they look pretty bad at this point.
Yeah.
I would probably say I would put like Spider-Man 2 with, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man 2 at the top for now, and then Homecoming number 2. Mm-hmm. Then Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1 in third place. Then I would go the 2 Andrew Garfield ones in order that they came out. So 1 is better than 2. And then the very bottom is definitely Spider-Man 3. Because I will never ever forgive that dance sequence where he's got the Venom powers and he's doing the weird jazz finger snapping thing. Like that is one of the worst sequences in a superhero movie. Full stop.
I remember when I watched that sequence in theaters with the whole emo sequence, I thought it was like the most cringeworthy thing I've ever seen.
Still, I have a hard time looking at it right now.
Really?
Like if I
because
play,
I've kind of softened my stance on it. I think there were other parts of the movie that were a lot worse.
Oh yeah, I mean maybe in terms of like effects.
Like James Franco and his character, that whole subplot is awful.
Yeah, I agree with you there too. But I don't know, there's something about it feels like they were trying to go for him being cool, but it just didn't land. It was so bad.
And Sam Raimi's like a B movie guy, right?
Yeah.
So he'll go off the deep end in certain times because it's campy, it's meant to be lighthearted. But I think for me, Homecoming is up there with Spider-Man 2. I probably have Spider-Man 2 slightly ahead because I feel like it goes into Spider-Man's character and psyche a bit more. But to me, I think Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man, followed by Tobey Maguire second. I did not like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man at all. I thought he was a complete asshole.
I mean, at the time they came out, I did prefer Garfield's Spider-Man to Tobey Maguire's, and I think that was because I still had a bad taste in my mouth from Spider-Man 3. But now, like, I think some time has passed, and I'm like, yeah, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. He believes in the performance. It's not like he's giving a non-committed performance. And there were
not at all.
And there were things about the way he's depicted, like using science and his chemistry with Emma Stone that I still really, really like.
Well, it's real chemistry, so.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. That's the question. Like, is it a chemistry that's coming out of the filmmaking, or is it just a natural off-screen type of thing? And it was probably the latter.
Yeah. She remains the best part about those Amazing Spider-Man films.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, by far. I'm kind of in the minority because I like the second one more than the first one.
Even with like Dane DeHaan's Green Goblin and the Jamie Foxx Electro?
You know what? I thought the Electro character was very convenient, but I didn't mind the new interpretation of him. Dane DeHaan's Green Goblin bothered me more, but the Lizard in the first one I didn't really like. And the second one kind of won me over because it dealt with the death of a major character, of Emma Stone's character, Gwen Stacy. Right. And I thought that was quite well done. But again, like the second one, it kind of falls into the pitfalls of all the other sequels of having too many villains, too many subplots, too many things going on. Again, this is why I like Homecoming, because it's so self-contained. As a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, I think it's really up there. It's almost like Iron Man in a sense.
Yeah, and I'm kind of like maybe time will tell like how that actually came about, because in the way that it feels so separate. Maybe it was the involvement of the Sony people, or maybe it was folks like John Watts, the director, or the guys they got to write the screenplay. But yeah, it's going to be something that's worth decoding in the future, like how it has that quality compared to all the rest of the Marvel movies.
Yeah, and I usually rate my movies like a lot of times depending on what I expect out of it. So I walked in not expecting a whole lot. I was expecting a cookie cutter movie. But I was so impressed that a movie that is jointly made by Marvel and Sony, had a pretty new director, and had 6 screenwriters, I think. 6.
Oh, really? Was it 6?
Yeah, I think so. I was shocked that they were come out with such a coherent, unified project. Because, like, you watch other Marvel movies, and sometimes there's only a couple screenwriters or one director, and the X-Men films are kind of guilty of this, but it sprawls in all sorts of different directions. There's, like, a lack of cohesion to the whole thing.
Yeah, it really feels like directed and produced by committee, but yeah, it's almost like Spider-Man Homecoming is like the true underdog. Like, it had a lot going up against it. It had, everything you just described, all of the concerns over how prominent Tony Stark would be. Even people being petty about the marketing, like the design of the poster or the way the trailers were cut. And despite all of that, it really came out on top.
It really did. You kind of touched on this, but there are a couple scenes in the trailers where Iron Man and Spider-Man are together that never showed up in the film.
Yeah, and I mean, for my money, I didn't really get why people were so focused on that, but I don't know. What did you make of it?
Well, I mean, that was kind of my fear, was that because Robert Downey Jr. he is basically the face of the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. I was afraid that they would lean on him too much, because doing a Spider-Man and rebooting it so soon after Amazing Spider-Man 2 represents a risk. So I didn't know if they were going to like completely commit to Tom Holland, but I'm glad they did. And at the same time, I was watching an interview with Kit Harington, who plays Jon Snow in Game of Thrones, and he talked about how he had spent hours filming fake scenes to throw off people.
Oh,
and I feel like the trailer for Spider-Man was kind of a proxy for that, where they kind of throw things at you just to throw you off. Because there are a couple twists and turns about characterizations and plot stuff in the movie that really catch you off guard.
Yeah, and I mean, that, now that you say that, it's kind of like I almost want them to do that more, because
yeah, exactly.
In this age where people break down trailers frame by frame, the hour after they come out, and they're trying to tease out all this information, and they'll make a big like list type post of like top 20 things we learned from the Spider-Man trailer before the movie comes out, and I'm like, why? Like, what's the value here other than getting some clicks from people who are too impatient? I don't know. So if it means that studios kind of look at that online culture and they're like, haha, we're going to get around you by doing a bunch of stuff that we never had any intent to use. And I'm like, yeah, do it. Do more of it.
So like, this is probably like the advent of a new kind of marketing where you consciously deceive your fan base. Because I think maybe everyone saw the trailer for Batman v Superman and just got turned off by the entire thing because they revealed way too much. So for the new Justice League trailers, I wonder if there are any parts in it that are there just to throw people off. If that's the direction we go, and I feel like the Star Wars franchise is going to have to go in this direction as well, because there's so much scrutiny around everything they do.
Yeah.
That they're going to have to throw people off. They're going to have to like consciously not lie, but definitely not be entirely truthful towards their market, towards their audience until the film comes out. But speaking of theaters, I was watching Homecoming, and I kind of told you this before, but there was a kid sitting behind me who would just not shut up.
Oh, yeah.
And
was he just doing like a running commentary like, hey, I like that bit? Or okay.
Yeah, he was. And he started talking during the trailers of the movie. And I'm like, okay, whatever. It's just a trailer. I don't care. Like, as long as he shuts up during the movie, it's fine. But then, like, the movie, there are bits and parts, especially like during like important reveals and twists where he would like start doing his commentary, and I really wanted to get up and just stab the kid in the eye.
You're so violent.
And no, but like it made me so angry, and there are people in front of me.
I've been in your shoes before, yeah.
Right. And there are people sitting in front of me who also looked back to where the kid was sitting, just, like giving them like the evil stare, but you can only do so much in a dark theater.
Yeah, exactly.
But the guy sitting like 2 seats next to me finally just had it and just told the kid to shut up. And so he kind of beat me to the punch. And the kid was just like, oh, sorry. And I think he did that like 2 or 3 times throughout the movie. like apologize when his buddies beside him told him to shut up. But at the same time, I'm just like, dude, just shut up. Like, don't say anything.
I mean, has he never been in a movie before? I don't know.
I don't know. He was like he's like a young high school kid. You should know better. And I get that he's excited. He's probably like a big fan. But holy hell, you need to just shut the fuck up.
Yeah. I mean, this is why I was saying to you when you first told me about this, that we need more kind of alternative movie theaters in Canada, like the Alamo Drafthouse, where they have strict etiquette guidelines. And if you break them, they turf you out. They actually have an usher come and pull you out of the theater. I get why they don't do that in Cineplex, because Cineplex has got to, they're the major chain.
They got to make money.
In Canada, they can't, and they can't make too many enemies, but there's just enough cases of people being like with the phones in the theaters or talking during the movie to make it worthwhile. And I mean, just put one in Vancouver, put one in Toronto. That's all I ask for. So the two of us can know that we can go to a movie and not be interrupted.
And I was just going to say, too, I think, like, it's been a while since I've been to a theater that crowded. Like, I just don't like crowds. Call me antisocial, call me a curmudgeon, whatever. It's not something I can get behind. And this just kind of reinforces the fact that I don't like being in a theater that has a lot of people, because you just, like, 1 in 100 people who go to that auditorium is an idiot. And so sometimes I think I saw Moonlight with like only 5 other people in the theater, and that was awesome.
Yeah, when it can feel like a private screening, then you're like, and that happens. Well, I mean, if you decide to go to see a movie towards the end of its run, then that's definitely more guaranteed. But then how would we get the podcast made?
Exactly. The other thing too is, like, when you watch a movie with a crowd, there's like a weird synergy where, like, if other people laugh, then you find certain scenes a lot funnier or scarier or whatever. Yeah. And so, like, the whole debate about how, like, movie theaters are going to lose money because of video on demand and whatnot and blah, 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 blah. And I get it. I'm sure that some people who are ambivalent about going to the movies just will end up just not going. But there's nothing that replaces that kind of atmosphere and environment of actually going into a theater, having like a giant screen in front of you and sitting with like 100 other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, part of me thinks that some of the kind of alarmist articles that you see on that topic that talk about like declining audiences and stuff, that there's something wrong statistically with the numbers they're collecting, because it never really, it always seems like the theaters are plenty full when new movies open. But maybe, I don't know, maybe it's like reflective of the longer run of a movie or something, like as it gets into its 3rd or 4th week, maybe the stuff starts to drop off. I don't know.
Right. But I've also never met like a business analyst who like does all this number crunching be also simultaneously like a big movie buff. So I don't think they can tap into the psyche of a person who really likes going to movies, because it's kind of like how, I mean, I hate to bring this up again, how journalists can't run a business and business people can't run a newspaper.
Yeah.
Like there's a disconnect there, and it's hard to find a proper cross-section of someone who understands both the business and the film itself.
Yeah, actually, I've got an anecdote for you, and this could be a good way to close things out. I came across this tweet a few days ago, and for me, it was the perfect expression of what you just said. And it was a memo that someone had saved from the pre-production on Back to the Future. Okay. And it was a set of memos from one of the executives from the studio, and he was reviewing like the 2nd or 3rd draft of Back to the Future before it was greenlit. And in his comments, he says, "This version is great, so much better than the previous version, but I think the title, Back to the Future, will put it in too much of a genre category and will be hard to market. I propose retitling the movie The Spaceman from Pluto."
I remember reading about this.
Right? And for me, that was like the perfect distillation of, that kind of never-ending struggle between the money people in Hollywood and the creative people in Hollywood. And it's just, at a certain point, never the twain shall meet, because you've got people who literally think that title, The Spaceman from Pluto, would be a better thing to call a movie like Back to the Future.
And how does The Spaceman from Pluto even tie into anything in the movie?
Well, I think like when Marty McFly first crashes into that barn, the farmers mistake him for like an alien from Pluto or something, and then there's that sequence where he dresses up in the hazmat suit and he plays the recorder on George McFly's ears and like convinces him that he's Darth Vader, but then he mixes up bits and pieces to make it sound more spooky. He like combines a couple of film franchises. So I think that's what the executive was going for, but yeah, still pretty wrong-headed.
Yeah. So I'm glad we escaped that. Moving on and looking forward to the rest of July, we've got some big movies coming up, eh?
Yeah, well, we talked a little bit about the advance buzz for War for the Planet of the Apes last episode, and, you know, people are calling it, like, one of the most significant blockbusters of the past 10 years, which, like, makes my heart go...
And that buzz has not died down, eh?
No, I mean...
Like, if anything, it's picked up.
Exactly. But one movie that's coming out that we kind of neglected when we were talking about July buzz last episode, Dunkirk, because that comes out on the 21st. And I think maybe it was because I actually kind of forgot that Dunkirk was coming out. I don't know how, because I've been a Christopher Nolan fan for pretty much my entire movie buff.
You're not a fan anymore.
Oh, I have to turn in my membership card, man. No, it's...
What are you expecting, though?
Well, I think the first thing that kind of captured my attention with the Dunkirk release was Christopher Nolan's open letter, or he did a kind of an essay of sorts in the Telegraph where he talked about the pitch that got him the money he needed to make Dunkirk. And that was kind of cool because he talked about how he told Warner Brothers he needed an American-sized budget to make what would otherwise be a small British movie about a very British story, by telling them that he wanted to do it like VR without the goggles.
Okay.
And kind of like thrust people into the experience in a way that hadn't been done for a long time.
Right.
Probably the closest comparison would be the opening sequence of Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah, we know that Christopher Nolan is a very, I think, technically innovative director.
Yeah.
I think in every single movie or at least most of the movies he's done, he's always introduced some sort of new technique or new storytelling method.
Yeah.
And in the trailers, you'll hear the clock ticking a lot in the background. And apparently that motif is very prominent. It's a very big theme throughout the film.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, so in the absence of a soundtrack, I think he's going to use that to build suspense and tell a story. Kind of like how he did with Edith Piaf in
Inception, yeah.
Yeah, kind of like that. I've kind of not soured, but I definitely don't put Christopher Nolan as high regard as I have in the past, because upon multiple viewings of his movies, I just find him to be kind of not pretentious, but definitely a little drawn out. He takes a little too long to get going, and he's so meticulous it gets tiring.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of a version of a criticism I've heard off and on about his stuff. You know, taken another way, you could almost talk about how his movies tend to have trouble with like the emotional aspect. You know, they don't really get into the hearts of their characters in the way that like a less action oriented movie might.
And he's always been criticized for having like really poorly developed female characters, right?
True. Yeah. Yeah. Which made Interstellar like more of an interesting experiment, because he had so much screen time given to Jessica Chastain and to Anne Hathaway.
But a lot of his films, especially, Dunkirk is for sure going to be very male dominated because it's a war movie.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So
yeah.
Do you think this is like a dark horse for a Best Picture type movie?
It's hard to say because
his films, I think, have constantly been underrated in that regard. I don't know why, but I think the Academy just sees him as like a blockbuster movie director, and he doesn't get the proper props he deserves.
If I were a betting man, I'd probably say that this won't get the kind of like major Oscar attention that you might expect. You know, even though the Academy tends to go for war movies to a disproportionate amount, the fact that Nolan's involved, yeah, that might hurt his chances a bit. But the one different thing about this that I only just learned about recently is actually the runtime. It's actually a very short movie. It's only an hour 40.
Oh, wow. That's really short for Nolan. Exactly.
And a lot of people were kind of pointing that out and saying that, you know, it suggests that he's doing something different. He's not going to have these longer sequences with like elaborate, he's still going to have like a lot of elaborate technical stuff and practical effects happening, but it'll be more short and to the point and, you know, intense bursts of it. So taken, you know, when you look at it that way, maybe the Academy will see the movie and think, oh, he's not doing what we've seen from him in the past. You know, maybe he deserves a little bit more attention.
Do we have advance buzz on Dunkirk?
Yeah, because I don't know if the true like review embargo is broken yet, like if the trades are allowed to start publishing full reviews, but reactions are starting to leak out from those people on Twitter, and they're saying that it's pretty good. If you're comparing it against other July releases, it sounds like there's a lot more positive buzz around War for the Planet of the Apes compared to Dunkirk. Like more people are saying like,
I would put money on Planet of the Apes too.
Yeah, like nobody's saying that Dunkirk is as significant of a movie as War is, but yeah, it's definitely up there. You know, nobody's kind of screaming about it being a disappointment or anything.
But I mean, we're off to a great start in July with Spider-Man: Homecoming, so hopefully this just kind of momentum continues.
Yeah, and there's even good stuff coming up in August too. Like
yes, we'll get to it though. We'll get there.
Yeah, that about does it for this episode. Head on over to kinetoscope.ca if you're not tired of hearing us talk about all things movie and TV. We've got new review of season 10 of Doctor Who that was just posted a few days ago, if you're a Doctor Who fan, and a new Netflix recommendations post, as well as reviews of all of these things we've been talking about as we see them.
Be sure to check out Rob's review of Spider-Man: Homecoming and look for mine on Dunkirk and War for the Planet of the Apes when it comes out. From Vancouver, I'm Jason Chen.
And from Toronto, my name is Robert Snow. Thanks for listening.